Chapter 42. Time compression. Adele was moving within the orb. Rinoa was trembling, shaking her head. Cypher. No more. Please. She was begging him now. Rinoa. Cypher leaned his chin onto her shoulder, attracted to her warmth, to the healing energy that came from her. It's not too late, Rinoa whispered. Adele's mouth was opening, recognizing the power in Rinoa as she recognized the power in her. Cypher. Squall's voice was like an avenging angel. Rinoa nearly cried in relief. No. Growling, Cypher pushed Rinoa off of him, holding her roughly by the shoulders. Rinoa and Adele. The sorceresses as one. Watch closely, Squall. Let's see how a knight serves when his sorceress becomes another. Laughing, Cypher threw Rinoa to the ground. Squall was sprinting their way. Adele's claws were pushing at the clear substance encasing her. Rinoa! Selfie yelled. The others were just behind Squall. Trailing them, Laguna was running with Elone. He was watching Adele awakening with wide eyes. She was, probably, his greatest nightmare come to life. Adele's claws breached the clear sealant. The burst of air that came out hit Squall like a blizzard. He cried out, covering his eyes. He heard Rinoa scream. In fear. In pain. Their bond was still strong. He could hear her crying out for him in their hearts. When the wind calmed and Squall could open his eyes, his heart sank. His eyes widened as his mouth filled with the taste of bile. Adele was standing up. Her enormous height was more than a little intimidating. Stuck into her chest, being absorbed into her body, Rinoa's head and torso were hanging out. Her arms had been pulled back, her legs absorbed already. Her eyes were rolled back into her head. She was shaking almost like she was seizing. Adele was feeding on her. The wicked sorceress had a hungry, angry grin on her face as she beheld Squall. Her ruby eyes narrowed on him. You? She growled, her voice rumbling like gravel. You got a problem with me? Squall asked angrily, coming in closer. He was pulling out his heart once again. He was going to slaughter her. He was going to bath in her blood. He was going to enjoy doing it for daring to touch Rinoa. I know you. Adele growled, she sounded confused. The brown-haired, gray-eyed youth was not someone who looked familiar. But there was still something about him. An air surrounding him that reminded her of that hated man who trapped her for so long. Sorry, we've never met, Squall growled. You're his, she hissed. I'm hers, Squall corrected, looking at Rinoa. You're going to pay for this. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to enjoy it. Cypher charged for him. Squall jerked his blade up and to the side. Cypher cried out as a second slash, deeper than the first, opened on his chest. He dropped down, bleeding violently. He landed close to Squall and the blood formed a small puddle on his boots. Squall stepped forward, trailing footsteps stained red. Adele grinned as though pleased by the action. You will die first. Then him. Rinoa collapsed forward, her hair falling over her face. Squall couldn't see whether or not she was still conscious, but he knew that she wasn't able to help him at just this moment. And he couldn't use any of his magic for fear of it hurting her. That was fine. He had defeated a sorceress once already. He could defeat another one. Yes, Adele was more powerful than Edia. But Squall was also stronger now than he had been then. Adele was a sorceress. She was more than capable of magic. Yet, somehow, that wasn't her first attack. She moved before Squall so fast she was a blur. The claws on the end of her gloves slashed out for him, burning slightly with magic. Squall swatted it away with his gunblade. She twisted to slice with her other hand. Squall ducked. He kicked out, planting his boot onto the side of her knee. She buckled, turning. Rinoa's body jerked and Squall cursed as he drew back. He jumped around, trying to hit Adele from behind. The sorceress punched back. Her fist didn't hit him, but the raw energy did. Squall cried out as he was tossed backward. He slid on his back for a few feet before pushing himself up onto his feet and skidding to a halt. Adele's attention was on him. Her back to the others. She didn't see nor hear Zell charging. He cried out at the last second, slamming a burning fist into her back. Adele choked out a breath, her back arching from the strike. Rinoa made a small sound of distress and Squall had to bite his tongue to avoid yelling at Zell. They had little choice at this time. Adele turned to swipe her claws at Zell. Selfie moved in front and to the side. The prongs on her vision slashed across Adele's face. The black tattoos on her chest and face were stained with her blood as Selfie jumped onto her back, then pushed her down as she jumped over the sorceress. Adele turned, throwing her magic. Selfie ducked under the blast that hit the wall with a crashing sort of explosion. Squall lifted his gun while Adele's back was to him. He held back his magic and shot 3 quick pulse shots. The ammo packed a hearty punch and Adele cried out. She turned to him. Quistis's queen whipped out and struck her. Adele cried out, her back arching. Quistis struck a second time, wrapping around Adele's neck. She jerked, pulling the large woman down. She crashed onto her side then fell back, turning over and grabbing Quistis's whip. Electricity sparked from her hands, shooting up the body. Quistis grinned as the sparks absorbed into her body. They felt good. Rejuvenating. More than just a simple immunity, with Thundaga she was actively absorbing the energy. It felt almost like a cure spell sinking into her body. Quistis grabbed the lightning, and shot it back towards Adele. The sorceress cried out, her body jerking in pain. Rinoa cried out, thrashing as part of her body. Quistis! Squall yelled out desperately. Gasping, Quistis cut off the magic. She hadn't thought Rinoa would be affected too. Laughing, Adele pushed herself up. She jerked the queen away from her throat. Rinoa was panting, whimpering against her chest. Adele stroked her cheek gently. "Forget something?" she asked, smirking. Bang! Adele cried out. Irvine's shotgun blast to her back had her bleeding down her long skirt. His lifted his Ixter with a growl. "Forget something?" he mocked. Adele turned. Zell struck her back. She turned again. Squall let out a blast. She turned. Selfie hit. Adele yelled in pain and frustration. Quistis hit her back. Sorceresses were powerful, but they were still human. Seeds were trained to attack in groups and bring down a target as a team. The exact sort of thing that a single sorceress had trouble fighting against. It was a swarm against a lone target. Laguna let out a breath of awe as he watched them all work like a well-oiled machine. Dodging, attacking, provoking. There were no extraneous movement. Every finger twitch, every breath, was carefully placed so as to do the most good. Laguna had seen how they could fight through himself and his friends. He had thought that to be impressive. Back in their own bodies, the seeds that had lent them their strength seemed like something far more than human. Laguna knew they were holding back, too. None of them wanted to hurt Rinoa, so they were only carefully striking Adele from behind. It was a strange thing of beauty. Like watching a deadly ballet. These human weapons were trained to kill sorceresses. They did their jobs expeditiously and with far more ease than Laguna would have imagined possible. Adele had been in the back of his mind for 17 years. He knew that if she ever broke free, his death was assured. He honestly believed that, if the impossible happened, nothing would be able to stop her. He knew of VIII, but he had always thought that their abilities had been exaggerated. He had been in SDR for so long that he had begun to believe, as most of his subjects did, that the outside world was more backward, weaker than the mighty SDR. VIII may not have SDR's technological advancements, but they more than made up for it with strength and magical abilities given by their GF. Squall was the clear leader. He often didn't have to do more than call out a name and the person knew exactly what he wanted. When it was Squall's turn to strike, he was fast and deadly. Pouncing like true predator, with eyes that weren't quite blank nor really alive. "What do you think?" Elone whispered to him, as though she could possibly disturb them. "He's amazing, isn't he?" Laguna took a breath to keep himself calm and nodded. "Zell! The princess!" Squall ordered. Quistis had her whip around Adele's wrists, pulling her backwards with Irvine's combined strength. Selphie had brought her to her knees with a strike to the back of her legs. Zell ran forward, jumping over Adele's body. He took hold of Rinoa's shoulders, snarling at Adele's face that he found himself directly in front of. The sorceress attempted to bite him. Zell headbutted her. Squall ran forward, his heart shining. He jumped down beside Adele. The woman glared and Zell pulled back on Rinoa. "Selphie!" Squall ordered. The spunky girl jumped onto the sorceress's back. She tossed her vision around Adele's neck. The chain bit into her skin. Selphie put her foot down between Adele's shoulder blades. She jerked back and Adele choked. Squall moved the lion heart into her view. Adele glared at him hatefully. Squall's eyes were blank as he looked at her. Adele was breathing hard, panic in her eyes. This couldn't happen. She was all-powerful. How did these little whelps beat her so easily? "Garden trains Seed," Squall quoted calmly. "Seed destroys the sorceress." Twisting his blade, her dropped low. His heart speared up, through Adele's chest at an odd angle. The sorceress coughed blood onto her lips. Zell pulled on Rinoa, Squall and Selphie pulled onto Adele. It was like peeling glue from skin, ripping Rinoa out of her. "Selphie, Quists! Fall back!" Squall ordered. The girls ran away. Irvine took Selphie's place and helped Squall jerk Adele away. Rinoa was separated from her body with a sickening squelch sort of sound that made him feel sick. The large sorceress collapsed down against the ground. A bright, purple gas expelled from her body. It rushed towards the nearest girl. Towards Rinoa. Rinoa gasped, her eyes snapping open as a rush of power flowed into her. She pushed away from Zell, grabbing for her heart. She was breathing hard, surprised, Squall moved quickly to her side, dropping down beside her.
Rinoa.
He reached for her gently. She looked at him, her eyes wide and scared. She threw her arms around his neck and clung tight onto him. She was shaking slightly, but she wasn't hurt. Squall held her back, letting out a small breath. Knowing she had to be dead, that was the only way she could give away her powers, Laguna approached Adele slowly. The tyrant of Esthar had been taken down by the 6 of them like they had done such things many times before. True experts in sorceress killing.
He did it,
Kiros whispered, looking at Adele's body. It was ragged and bloody from the treatment the seeds had given her.
I guess that takes care of that.
Laguna ran his hand over his long hair.
Wow.
He looked back at Squall, who was cradling Rinoa gently. The same mercenary that had easily and carelessly killed a woman in cold blood was now caressing his lady like she was made of spun glass and might break if he was too rough with her. Rinoa sniffed, pushing back slightly to look at him.
Thank you, Squall.
He nodded, standing up and pulling her with him. He set her down on her feet. Rinoa frowned as she felt a pressure against her head. Familiar. Uncomfortable. Squall frowned as well. He didn't quite feel the pressure, but he could feel Rinoa's heart falling away from his slightly. No, being pulled away.
Rinoa,
he took her shoulder. The spark of energy that threw the limb away was familiar and painful. He looked into her eyes as Rinoa's head fell back, her eyes rolling into her head. The others gathered around, watching her trepidatiously. Rinoa's hands moved out, her breathing deepened and hastened. She wasn't wavering like she had been last time, but Squall couldn't feel Rinoa anymore. Her mind was gone.
Ultimecia?
He asked softly. Rinoa's eyes opened, but it wasn't her that looked out at him.
Elone.
Laguna looked to his girl.
Now's your chance.
Elone nodded, her eyes closing. She focused and Squall looked to Rinoa. She flinched and he could imagine the high-pitched squealing that must have started in her head. Her eyes rolled and her body slumped forward. Squall caught her before she hit the ground.
Okay, Elone,
Laguna whispered to her gently.
She only needs a moment. Bring Rinoa back and force Ultimecia out.
Elone nodded. Her eyes scrunched up in concentration. Squall watched Rinoa carefully until her eyes opened again. She looked up at Squall.
I was inside Adele,
she shivered.
The younger Adele. It was weird. Perfect,
Laguna nodded.
Ultimecia was in 3 time periods, exactly as she needed. Okay, this is the showdown, folks. Time compression is about to begin.
The ground started rolling, like water, under their feet, almost like in response to his words. Squall and the others gasped. Rinoa clutched onto Squall's arm, her eyes wide.
Love, friendship, and courage.
Laguna reminded them, but it sounded like his voice was coming from a far tunnel.
Guys.
Rinoa reached out for the others. They ran for her quickly. Everyone took hold of her hand and, even as the world around them rippled and rocked in a most nauseating way, everyone's bodies remained solid and firm.
Show 'em what you got!
Laguna yelled. His voice was so distorted now that they could barely understand what he was saying. Squall turned and watched as his face faded away.
Is everyone okay?
Rinoa asked, her voice echoing strangely.
Still here,
Selfie laughed nervously. They all cried out as it felt like the ground suddenly fell out from under their feet. The warped and blended world was washed away as the six of them crashed down through the floor. No, through the sky. Through the water. It was impossible to tell where they were going. It felt like they were seeing the entire world melting into one big boiling pot of color, sound, and images.
Where are we supposed to go?
Quistis asked, disturbed by the lack of reality around them.
To Edia's house.
Squall answered easily. The place where his family had grown. It was their place. Rinoa frowned.
I don't think I can get there. I'll probably disappear.
Squall's arm tightened around her waist.
Just stay by my side. I won't let you disappear. That place is ours. All of ours. Including yours.
Rinoa looked up at him before leaning against his chest. Lights and images continued to flash through the compressing world around them. The images they could see were quick, often blurry snapshots of time, and it was hard to focus on anything. A huge city built of stone and light. A large ship flying on the clouds. People, faces, that had been lost to the ages. Odin. An eye in the sky. A green machine under the water. 2 moons in the sky. A woman in a manned, running machine. It was a strange thing to see. Harder still to understand. Squall didn't think he ever would. His arms tightened around Rinoa and he focused on her instead. On what was most important to him. Nothing else mattered at all. Until... Squall, Rinoa said softly, confused. He looked up again. Kind of surprised to find himself now standing. The room they were in was unfamiliar to him. But it wasn't to Rinoa.
This is the guest room at the presidential residence in Deling City, she frowned, turning. This is how it looked when Edia, Ultimecia was here. So what do we do?
Irvine asked, turning around.
Well, there's a door there,
Squall said simply, looking towards the double doors. The others shrugged. Together, they started walking forward. It felt weird walking, like they were doing so through water, but not quite as dense. Selfie reached the doors first and pushed them open, but they didn't lead to the hallway before the podium outside the residence. Selfie looked around because they were now standing on the path into Balam Garden, back when it was still on the ground.
So, that's weird.
Zell looked around. It kind of looked like the sky was melting. Laughing from overhead caught their attention. They turned quickly to see someone coming down from above. A woman. A weirdly dressed woman with a pretty face but the oddest dress. She had painted her face pale white, her lips bright blue. She looked out at them through artificially bright pink and blue eyes with a grin on her face. Lifting her hand, she cast a Firaga spell. Everyone cried out and jumped away. She turned, continuing to laugh. It was a slow, deep, familiar laugh. Squall had heard it many times from Matron's throat when she wasn't Matron.
Ultimecia.
He looked at the woman, confused. He honestly hadn't expected finding her to be quite so easy. The woman continued laughing. She cast a Blizzaga spell this time. Everyone dodged again. Irvine lifted his gun and let out a quick shot. The woman screamed. Then twisted, and disappeared.
What was?
Squall shook his head, confused. Surely killing her wouldn't be that easy. More laughter. They all looked up again. Another woman was floating down. Wearing a thin black dress and a strange orange, yellow, and red cape and hat. She landed before them, still laughing. Her face was still white, but her lips were orange now. Her bright eyes blue. The same face. Ultimecia again. Quistis struck this time. Save the queen cut through the woman easily. The sorceress cried out, floating away. As dead as the last one. The scene around them was melting through different places. They weren't in Balam Garden any longer. It looked almost like the tomb of the unknown king, but a lot less overgrown. Almost like how it would look while under construction. Even as Squall turned, looking for something else, the scene melted again. This time forming a huge stone city. They were standing on a walkway in the sky, looking around at tall buildings big enough to rival those in Esthar. Laughter made them turn. Another version of Ultimecia was descending. This one was wearing a bright yellow gown, adorned with red ribbons. They could see her long black hair tied back into a complicated bun. She landed, throwing out a Thundaga spell. Selphie jumped over the lightning strike and, crying out, hit the prongs of the vision directly into the woman's chest. She cried out, then spun and followed the others into nothingness.
What the hell is going on here?
Zell demanded to know. The scene turned into an open field with a gentle breeze rustling the grass. Laughter announced the arrival of the next sorceress. Wearing a strange blue dress that looked to be tied around her body like a long scarf, they couldn't see her face through a veil over her head. But that laughter was undeniable and she attacked with a Blizzaga spell the moment her feet touched down. Selphie took her out in 2 hits. Zell killed the next one, an Ultimecia wearing all black who cast more magic than the others. Squall killed the one after that, an Ultimecia with alternating gold and black stripes in her long hair wearing all white. She disappeared into the nothingness and Zell threw up his hands.
Just how long is this going to last?
He demanded to know. The laughter that answered him had the same cadence as Ultimecia's, but it was deeper. Somehow more distorted. The world around them melted again from what appeared to be an underwater city with bright lights in all directions to a thick cyclone of dirt and rust that wrapped all around them. The ground died under their feet and everything got dark and distorted beyond reason. From a hole in nothingness above them, yet another Ultimecia fell. Unlike any of the others before her, she was not dressed in any outlandish outfits with bright makeup. Though her face remained human-like, the rest of her did not. She looked like a cross between a caterpillar and a forbidden monster, grotesque in every rainbowed color of a bleeding bruise. Long, spindly arms hung off of a segmented body with no legs. Her face was large and it looked like it was only half-formed, like a clay sculpture that hadn't been given full form. She towered over them, wavering around in the air as though her own body were foreign to her.
That thing is ugly,
Selphie grimaced, looking at it in revulsion. Ugly, big, and fast. It was a bad combination. It looked like a caterpillar but struck like an anaconda. Its spindly arms smacked out, hitting like whips. It roared something that might have sounded like words right before a blast of Firaga struck for them. Everyone leapt out of the way. Rinoa came up and let out a quick shot. Her star cut up along the segmented body, opening up a long slice that bled deep purplish-black blood. It didn't so much bleed as it oozed though. Rinoa caught her edge and grimaced at the leathery skin and blood that remained.
That is nasty.
She grimaced, shaking her arm in an attempt to dislodge the flesh. Squall ran forward, his heart shining even in the weird, light-absorbing walls around them. He sliced out, digging into the strange beast. The Ultimecia thing yelled, slamming down her hand as though to crush him with the appendage. Squall jumped away. Her hand hit the ground. The quake spell she sent into the earth started rocking the strange piece of land they stood on. Everyone cried out as they fell, the earth itself pounding against them. All except Irvine. He was seemingly immune to the rocking affects. His affinity through the brothers made the bucking ground feel completely steady and natural. Lifting his Exeter, he let out a quick shot aimed for the eye of the beast. It hit true. Crying out, the sorceress reared back in pain. The earth stopped shaking and, groaning in pain, everyone got back to their feet. Selphie was up first, charging with an angry cry. The prongs on the end of the vision dug into the sorceress's skin, digging out long chunks of meat. The Ultimecia screamed, sweeping out her long, segmented tail. Selphie attempted to dodge but was too slow. The tail hit her broadside and, crying out, Selphie went flying.
Zell!
Quistis yelled, running for him. He put his hands together, holding them out for her. Quistis used him as a stool and jumped up, Zell helping send her flying. Quistis caught Selphie in the air and the two of them fell down together. Irvine was there to help catch them so Selphie wasn't slammed to the ground. Squall lifted his gun and shot 6 times, the Blizzaga-laced bullets hit the giant sorceress with an explosion of multiple spires of razor-sharp spikes. Blizzaga was considerably more powerful than Blizzara and the entire area got colder as a result of the attack. Growling at the temperature change, Zell pulled back his burning fist and shot out 6 explosive furigas. The fireballs hit the remaining ice spires causing them to burst into instant explosive steam bombs. The sorceress cried out as the burning gaseous water broiled her flesh. The already bruise-colored skin darkened and bubbled from the heat. Rinoa clenched her teeth, putting her hand to her shooting star. She had to remember, though it was hard to keep in mind, that she wasn't bound by the constraints of specific stocked spells. She was a sorceress, too. Any magic she wanted. Biting her lip, Rinoa touched the various feathers of her star. Firaga here, Thundaga here, water here, etc. She went around placing various spells on the different parts of her weapon. It took a fair amount of concentration to keep them all on their own feathers, but it wasn't impossible. Beaming to herself, she raised the magic-charged weapon and aimed for the Ultimecia's face. She had to clench her jaw together. It was getting harder to hold the spells apart. She didn't want to let them all touch before the weapon left her hand. They would hit her instead. The sorceress stopped moving for just a moment. Waving her spindly hands together to gather the magic for a spell. Rinoa grinned and shot her star. The spinning blade burned bright white as it shot through the air. It hit the sorceress and she cried out loudly in pain. The magic all released at the same time and the resulting explosion was strange. The white light of her star started absorbing all the energy around them. The white light shrunk and everyone felt a strange rumbling in the air. It bundled together, pulling on a magic in the air and through Rinoa. She paused, blinking. She had thought all the magic would just hit at the same time. This combination was not at all what she had. All at once, the energy exploded outward. Green and black, engulfing everything. Rinoa cried out and threw out a shield out around her friends. The magic explosion ripped through the air, decimating the area. If it hadn't already been nothingness, it would have been destroyed. It didn't make a sound. No, more like it absorbed all the sound. The light and lack of sound faded slowly, and Rinoa was left blinking at the crater she had made around the sorceress. A sorceress who now had a ramrod straight back. Her skin had been blasted away, her face torn off. It didn't even really look like whatever it had been before. Rinoa blinked as it began absorbing into the nothingness, following the sorceresses that had been killed before it. Squall blinked, looking over to her.
What did you do? I have no idea.
She shook her head, struggling to wrap her mind around that.
Well, it worked,
Irvine laughed, clapping her on the shoulder.
Nice job, Rinoa.
She smiled.
So? Now what?
They looked up, waiting for more laughter. None came.
Was that perhaps the last Ultimecia?
Quistis asked, frowning.
Then, does that mean we won?
Selfie looked between them. Squall frowned. That was still too easy. How could the sorceress be defeated that easily? The world was rocking around them now. It wasn't melting into anything else, but was rumbling like it was shaking apart. Rinoa reached out quickly for Squall. He held her close, his eyes moving around as the world vibrated to the point that it was just a blur. Rinoa frowned as she felt something rushing towards them. Something big. No, that wasn't the right word. Powerful?
It's not over,
Rinoa said, closing her eyes to the world around them. It was getting harder to look at the longer it went on. It was giving her a slight headache.
There's more. We're almost there. Almost where?
Selfie asked, rubbing her eyes. The weird nothing world they were standing in shattered like glass. The shards twisted and wrapped around them, settling to dust under their feet. Air, not quite fresh, blasted against their face. It smelled wet, like it was near the sea. But the scent was wrong. Not like fresh salt water. More like that distinct, polluted smell from dirty dishwater. Squall opened his eyes again and drew in a quick breath. Behind him, in his arms, he heard the others all make similar exclamations of awe. They were standing on the rocky outcropping of a cape next to an ocean. Just below them, there was a large chain, thicker than their bodies, that ran up and out towards an enormous floating castle over the water. It had demonic wings that didn't beat. The chains clinked loudly together as they moved in the air, coming off of a dark green sea filled with dirty foam. Squall! He turned at Quistis's cry. She wasn't looking up at the castle though. She was pointing behind them to the ruins they were standing in front of. They were familiar.
It looks like the orphanage,
Rinoa gasped. Squall frowned. It did. But different. Worse. The orphanage hadn't looked in the best shape when they last saw it, but the ruins of it looked centuries old now. The stone was weathered, the roof was completely collapsed, and most of the walls had fallen. Squall turned and looked back at the castle. Ultimecia's castle. He gritted his teeth.
Come on. We're here now. We just have to take her out.
He released Rinoa, leading the way down the rocks to where the chain was anchored. He frowned as he came in closer. There were people here. Dead and laying face down on the ground. They wore the uniform of VIII. He couldn't see their faces, but they were all in various states of decay.
Future seeds,
Squall looked at them.
We're fighting her across generations.
Rinoa stepped beside him, frowning at the dead seeds.
They didn't even make it to the chain. Come on,
Squall jerked his head forward.
Let's get to the castle before she realizes that we're here. We end Ultimecia's reign now.
He led the way. The chain links were enormous. So big that even when Squall put his full weight upon them, they didn't shake or really even move. He could walk across safely, only needing to worry about the ocean winds that gently rocked the long chains. Despite how steady it was still uneven and awkward to walk on. Squall had to slowly work his way across each link. Behind him, he heard the others carefully following him. When he turned, he could see Selfie leaping between links like she had done it all her life. Rinoa was being more careful, her arms outstretched to keep her balance. Zell was nearly on all fours. Squall turned and focused more on not falling himself. Halfway across the chain, 3 archways came up on their left. Squall frowned into the colorful vortex spinning within them. They looked almost like teleporters. He wasn't interested. He turned from them and continued up the chain. The castle had looked enormous from far away. The closer they got, the more it seemed to consume everything in its massive shadow. Squall frowned because, despite the chain, there really wasn't anything there to try to keep them out. She had to know that they were coming for her. Why wouldn't she have guards of some kind? The chain ended at the base of the steps to the castle doors. Squall jumped from the last link, landing on the dark gray, dry dust that covered the slightly uneven marble steps. He turned and made sure that everyone came off okay. Zell was the last one, having moved the slowest. Selfie was laughing, her cheeks bright red as though she were having the time of her life.
Good,
Squall nodded when Zell hit more solid ground with a sigh of relief. Zell lifted his eyes and groaned at the massive double doors.
This is her castle? Geez, has she heard of any color besides gray? We already knew that she has no taste,
Quistis grinned.
You saw how she dressed matron.
Selfie looked thoughtful.
You know, matron always favored long black dresses. And Adele wore that really weird costume thing. Maybe it's a sorceress trait. Maybe sorceresses just lose their sense of fashion. Please don't say that,
Rinoa frowned. Selfie and Quistis laughed at her.
Don't worry,
Quistis touched her shoulder gently.
Squall will still like you even if you decide to dress like a bird or something. Right, Squall? I might draw the line at full bird,
Squall said simply. Rinoa gasped, her eyes going wide.
Squall, are you teasing me?
He gave her a very small grin and Rinoa laughed. She threw her arms around his neck, pressing a kiss to his cheek that had the smile widening just slightly.
I trust you to protect me from a lack of fashion sense,
she said, cuddling her cheek to his.
If I start buying excessive amounts of feathers, you let me know. So, basically,
Irvine grinned salaciously,
you'll wear whatever he says to? Squall, please tell me you see the possibilities here.
Squall looked thoughtful for a moment and Rinoa grinned salaciously. She leaned into his ear and whispered softly.
Whatever you want. Or whatever you don't want.
Squall continued to look thoughtful, then gave her a smoldering sort of look. Rinoa grinned, pressing herself just a little closer to him.
Hey,
Zell frowned.
We're right here. Also, right outside of Ultimecia's castle. In case you forgot. Hey, I'm all up for defiling our enemy's front door.
Irvine raised his hand. He winked at Selfie.
It's kind of kinky. I'm down,
Selfie beamed.
I'm not,
Quistis rolled her eyes.
We are professionals and we were hired to do this, don't forget. I want to kill her and get back to our proper time already. This place is freaky.
Squall nodded as Rinoa released him.
Seriously?
Zell gave Irvine a look.
How can you possibly get it up here of all places? A true master can practice his craft anywhere,
Irvine said simply.
You're not wrong about the creepy factor though. You think what's her face really lives here? Seems more like a palace for Death himself. She's here,
Rinoa said certainly, her eyes moving up to the tallest tower.
I can feel her. She's powerful. She can't be more powerful than you,
Quistis reasoned.
You're both the only sorceress of your times, so you should have the same amount of power. That doesn't mean she doesn't have more experience with hers,
Squall said.
I agree with Quistis though. I want to get this over with and go home already.
Rinoa smiled, taking her hand in his.
Home. I like the sound of that. We stick together,
Squall said simply, looking between them.
Like Laguna said, we can't do this without each other. We started this together, we end it together. No man gets left behind. Yes, sir,
the others nodded, firmly. Squall led the way up the stairs. The others fell in step behind him. He was considering asking Zell to help him pull open the large double doors when they opened on their own. Fog came spilling out and Squall squared his jaw as he stepped through. The interior architecture was no less gothic and gaudy than the exterior. A large, swirling staircase took up most of the foyer, leading to a landing that wrapped around the second floor. Double doors on their left were sealed shut. At the top of the landing, a large monster was waiting. It was the only bright-colored thing they had seen so far, with vibrantly colored skin and an elaborate golden headdress and mask. It stared down at them, strangely feline. It stood up as they entered, getting to its feet and growling.
I was wondering when we'd meet her guards,
Quistis said, pulling out her whip.
I am Sphinx R,
the deep voice rumbled from above.
The Great Sealer. You are forbidden from walking here. Well, that's never stopped us before,
Zell snickered, raising his hands.
None shall touch the mistress until her work is complete,
Sphinx R growled. Though he looked feline, the sound he made was very canine.
Your mistress's reign ends tonight,
Squall promised. Sphinx R glared down at him.
I never liked you.
Squall frowned.
What? You die first.
With a roar, Sphinx R leapt from the balcony. Everyone jumped away to avoid being speared by Sphinx R's claws. Squall rolled and came up just in time to catch a swipe from the large, jagged appendages. He grunted at the force that reverberated up his arm. The way the thing spoke, the way he acted, Squall was starting to believe he wasn't a monster. He almost acted like a GF.
Squall.
Rinoa shot her star. Sphinx R dodged, jumping over the blade. He came back down, trapping it under his palm. He glared at her, then turned right back to Squall to continue his onslaught. He was faster than Squall anticipated and he was immediately put on the defensive. Quistis and Selfie were attacking Sphinx R's flanks, but his skin was like a rock. From behind, Irvine let out two shots that broke holes through this flesh, but they didn't bleed. Zell ran around to the front of the creature and took up place beside Squall. The two of them together were able to hold off the attack without being forced back further. Rinoa clicked the recall trigger on her star. It shot out from under Sphinx R's paw, upsetting his balance. As Rinoa caught the edge, Squall jumped forward, slamming his gun blade through Sphinx R's chest. The adamantine stone was far more powerful than his skin. Squall sank down deep and Sphinx R started shaking. Squall had deliberately missed his heart.
"Give up,"
Squall ordered.
"I won't kill you."
Sphinx R was laughing.
"I will not betray my mistress."
Squall frowned and moved to back up quickly. He didn't want to kill a GF. Not because he respected this one's power, but because it was dangerous. GF energy exploded outwards when they died. Squall and the others would be caught up in the blast if they killed him. The blow Squall had landed was deep, but it shouldn't have hit anything important enough to instantly kill. Sphinx R, however, fell to his side. The wound didn't bleed, but he was still laughing at them.
"Guys, back up,"
Squall said, quickly stepping away.
"Too late,"
Sphinx R laughed.
"I am the Great Sealer. Your power is mine. I die to steal it from you. The others shall guard your power from you. Run."
Squall turned. It was too late. A loud rumbling came from Sphinx R's body followed by a bright light. Not a second later, he exploded and the power burst forth. Everyone cried out as it slammed them. Squall gasped as he felt Shiva and Bahamut scream together before fading. They took his magic with them, the power they afforded him. Squall attempted to grab for them, but they were gone. Squall hit the ground with a grunt of pain. A second blast hit him and he heard his friends all cry out. "Squall!" Rinoa screamed. It sounded like her voice came from too far away. Squall tried to reach out for her, but he couldn't even see where she was. Sphinx R's laughter was fading now. Fading into a distinct, cough-like bark. Almost like a dog. End of chapter.